Not by me. I didn't say anything. That was not me. It was Pastor Angela.
Well, you know, there were two appointed gospels, and we have been texting back and forth. And this is why sometimes, as good as modern technology is, we need to pick up the phone and talk, right? But then again, it could just be the Spirit saying, y'all needed to hear a different sermon. So here we go. And it also shows, if I might, how good your senior pastor is. He can think on his feet. It just shows that, you know, all these beautiful accoutrements you have around here can be used at any moment and really have some significance and not just look pretty, but be functional as well. So we thank you, Pastor Chris.
I thank you that I don't just look pretty, but I'm also functional.
You know I'm just going to have to move on, otherwise we can be here all day. And they will want to be here all afternoon, right? Okay, you're taking up my time. I'm already 8 minutes in. Okay, so the title of, because I heard I always have to give titles, and of course, I sort of like roll with it to the end of the week and then sort of decide what I want. So this is my fault that Pastor Angela could not put it in the bulletin. But it's just simply, do you want to be made well? It's very simple. But as we dig into the text today, we're going to see just how simple it really is, or how difficult it is because we get in our own way. And so we heard this morning from Pastor Chris in the children's sermon about a man who had been laying there. We said 13 years for the kids because that seems like a really long time. But for those of us who are of adult and young adulthood, it was 38 years. And so Jesus asked that simple question, do you want to get well? And at first, the question may seem very obvious because the answer should be what? Yes. Right, yes, duh. And who doesn't want to get well? But when Jesus presents us with this question, I think he's asking us to think a little bit deeper. Because in our world today, when we hear, do you want to get well? It's not just about physical illness. It's about spiritual illness or wellness. It's also about emotional wellness. And it's about mental health wellness. It's all of those things. And so sometimes we may not want to get well because some of us use illness as an excuse to continue our mediocrity in our lives and also in our sin. Some of us use our own unfortunate incidents and trials or tribulations to excuse our sin and say, well, there's no getting well. There's no hope for me. There's no hope for anyone. Sometimes we call those kind of folks always having a pity party. Y'all know some of them folks? Okay, at least one person was honest, and I know we all do. And sometimes it's just that these people have given up the search for that ultimate truth, for that ultimate healing, that ultimate wellness. And they are literally sitting a few feet from the waters of the Holy Spirit being able to cure them and make them well. Now, of course, we can take the story literally and as a story about physical illness. But in John's gospel, oftentimes John is always talking about something imaginative and something symbolic for us. And so when we think about paralysis, let's think about paralysis in a wider sense. Let's think about, have you ever felt paralyzed in your life by something? Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's doubt, maybe it's debt, maybe it's indecision, maybe it's by the structural forces and systems that keep us from being able to be equitable with all people. Maybe it's the fact that there are people who live impoverished all the time, and we like to say it's their fault, but not really look at the entire picture and really see that it's all of our faults. Because if one suffers, don't we all suffer? If one is hungry, aren't we all hungry? Right. So when we start thinking about that, it gets a little bit deeper, doesn't it? And so then answering that question also becomes a little bit more complicated than just simply saying yes. And when you think about just the times that we live in, I don't know how many of you heard on the news already that there was a funeral going on at a church yesterday. And bullets started flying in the midst of a funeral. I don't know what could be worse. You're already grieving the loss of someone physically leaving you, even though you're celebrating their homegoing to the Lord, and someone opens up and makes this holy, sacred place a battlefield. It lets you know that sin, evil, the devil, Satan, whatever you want to call it, shows up in the likeliest of places. That even though we think we are safe when we're in the Lord's house, and we should be, that sin has a way of coming right up front and personal. And that we really do live in a time that a lot is going on, that there's a lot of adversity. There's a lot that stops us from being able to say yes and be made well. So how do we stay connected? How do we stay connected to one another? How do we stay connected to Jesus? We have a lot of inner resources, right? We know somebody is extremely creative right over here and don't say a word. And some people have a lot of wisdom, and there's also people who carry a lot of hope. But there's also, that doesn't negate the fact there's also a lot of people suffering. And we don't know what's ahead of us. The future is uncertain, right? We can guess at it, we can plan for it, but there's no certainty that we will be in it, let alone what it will look like, right? Okay, I just want to make sure y'all are still with me. So then when we hear Jesus ask the man the question, do you want to be made well? And he doesn't quite give just that straight answer, because we're all thinking, after laying there for 13 or 38 years, you'd be ready to say yes. Like whatever I got left, it's going to be a resounding yes. Because I've been waiting for my turn that seems to have been taken and stolen and all these other kinds of things. And the man has sort of a messed up answer, really, all these excuses about why he hasn't been able to get well. And then the miracle happens, right? How does this miracle take place? Well, I think if we ad-lib a little bit, we're told that Jesus looks at this man. And I think when Jesus looks at this man, he sees beyond all the excuses that the man is giving. Because remember, Jesus sees and knows with his heart first, and not with his eyes. And so he's able to see beyond that passivity, beyond that self-pity party that he was having. He's able to look at this man and see this man through his sickness, see that he has confessed to what's been holding him back in his excuses that he gave. Jesus is able to see that he really does want to have a full life, but he needs to do something first. He needs to be able to say, I want a full life. He needs to be able to say, I deserve to have the fullness of life. And he needs to fall in life all over again. But he has to get out of his own way, because he is the one who's holding himself back. Now, we know the gospel didn't say all that because it was a short 9 verses, but I think that's what was going on. And then Jesus says what? He looks up at the man, and without words, he says, stand up and walk. You have been made well. Because finally, the yes that comes is full of all those things I just explained. It's not just simply like, well, yeah, already now, it's almost 4 years. It's like, yes, I don't want to just walk, but I want to be able to live life and participate in life fully. And you'll notice that in all of this that we're given in these little short 9 verses, the man never goes to the pool. Isn't that something? He never goes to the pool and get in. He's just made well. And in the chapter before us, or before this, remember, it's about the woman at the well. And what does Jesus say to her? Where are those waters coming from? Those healing waters that are gushing. They're inside. Symbolically, it may be over there. But really, if you believe in me and you have faith in me, the water is already there. You just have to have the right answer. And the right answer comes from here and not from your mouth, saying yes. And so see that spring of water that's gushing up in the woman at the well that was able to make her feel alive and not ashamed is the same water that healed him and made him be able to just jump up, take his mat, and go on. So the question is, do you want to be made well? I think the answer is, if we're honest with ourselves, and we better be honest because we're up here in the house of the Lord, is some days yes, and some days not so much. Because some part of me, and I think some part of y'all, likes to play the role of the innocent victim. We like to blame other people for putting us down, for offending us, for wounding us, for whatever is going on that makes us not feel whole. And so then we get stuck. But we don't take responsibility for the fact that we let somebody else steal our joy so that we couldn't be whole. We focus on what other folks did and make them the reason for the reason we are not moving. And then some of us just like to complain. Y'all know who those people are. They're always complaining. You're like, hey, how you doing this morning? They're like, oh, let me tell you. Do you know what happened? And you're just thinking, oh, I should have just been one of those, hey, how you doing? And keep on walking and not stopped for an answer. But, you know, some people like to live in that. They like to live in that place where there's excuses. They're able to say, you know, I'm this way because my parents didn't raise me right. They did me wrong. My spouse always lets me down. I deserve to have better. It's really not my fault. It's all those people and all those circumstances. And they don't understand that the waters are so very close. They don't understand that they're on the very verge of being healed. They could just reach out and touch the water, but they're not ready to make that move. They're not quite ready to say yes. And so when we talk about, do you want to be made whole? Do you want to be healed? We have to really look at ourselves. It's sort of like, you know, Michael Jackson saying, the man in the mirror. You've got to look at the person in the mirror and do some introspection and do some self-critique and really say, you know, is this who I want to be? And then if not, say, with the help of Jesus, I'm willing to change. And that's saying yes. But we have to be willing to go down deep. We need to like sort of take that shovel and dig deep and sift out all that stuff, because I'm in church, all that stuff, all that camel's dung, and get it out the way so that we can see who we really are and how fully we're able to live. Because Jesus doesn't want us to have a mediocre life. Jesus doesn't want us to play it small. I'm not quite sure Jesus wants us to be on and over the top like Pastor Chris all the time, but if you can have half of that, you're living well. And so when you think about that source that draws you close, our lives have to be about something more than ourselves. And I think that's where we enter into, why am I here today? Why are we here together? And that's partnership. Because it's all about following Jesus, that one command. And isn't that meaning that we're supposed to be in service together, in service to one another, brothers and sisters, demographics, race, ethnicity, all that adds flavor to the mix. And it makes it so that we have to struggle with how we serve one another. Because if it was comfortable, everybody would be doing it. But because it stretches us to be uncomfortable, and you need to be uncomfortable sometimes, so that you realize what you're doing makes a difference, that it matters, that you're investing in something, you're taking a risk. There is a cost, but for the love of Jesus, it's worth it. And so when it comes to healing, Jesus isn't just coming out of anywhere and just showing up. Jesus is already there. Jesus is already here. Jesus is always in our consciousness. But oftentimes, we push him to the side because we don't want to be bothered. Okay, I got a few more minutes. I'm going to take a few more because you took mine. And so then, you know, when we think about this, when we examine how we walk in life, when we examine what our motives are, what our deepest desires really are, then we can say as children of God, yes to the loving world, yes to choose to love in a way that reflects Jesus and reaches out to people that may not look like ourselves. We can say, yes, I don't mind being uncomfortable sometimes. I know you may not get it talking to your neighbor or maybe even a family member, but this is what Jesus calls me to do. And we're free then to stand up, to take our mats and to walk. We reach out to the frightened, we reach out to the sorrowful, we reach out to the impoverished, and that doesn't always mean economic circumstances. Oftentimes it means emotional circumstances. People need to be filled up and realize that someone loves them. And oftentimes when they can see that reflection in someone who doesn't exactly look like them, that's a reaffirmation that it's real. Because sometimes when people look just like you, you're like, they have to say that because they're part of my group. But we act like other people aren't. And when you get that affirmation that someone is willing to drive 30 miles to see you, 30 miles to serve you, and they do this religiously, and then we meet you where you are, saying, I accept you with all of your flaws, with all of your hope, with all of your love, that's when we're saying yes to Jesus. That's when we're not letting paralysis stop us from acting in life and saying that we have to stay in our own little corners. God gave us this whole world to be able to explore it. Why would you want to play it small and minimize yourself and stay in one little corner when there's so much to enjoy? I mean, for God's sake, you'd be missing Pastor Angela and Pastor Chris, because guess what? I was the common denominator in that. Okay, give me some applause, y'all, because y'all got two great people here. But what I'm saying is that you never know where your blessings are coming from. You never know who's making the Spirit work in such a way that it affects not just you, but so many other lives that you had no idea you could touch. But if you just say yes, all sorts of wonderful things can happen. A shower of grace and kindness will fall upon you in the midst of your suffering, in the midst of your paralysis, in the midst of whatever you're going through. Jesus will show up for you, and he will make it well. And so I want you to know that Jesus creates in us every day an opportunity to join him in his work that he does, in his plan for the world. And he's got great work for all of us to do. Work we better get to doing. Work we better be serious about, because we're the ones who want to set the agenda for what the United States looks like, what Waukesha looks like, what Milwaukee looks like. Not the newspapers, not those naysayers, not those negative folks, but us. So if we want to do that, y'all better be ready to get up. I'm not speaking figuratively. Get up if you are able. And if you're not able physically to get up in your spirit. Pick up your mat and tell your neighbor next to you, get to walking. Amen.